Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The show is about to begin.
Hi, everybody. I'm Terri. Jeremy and I are co-CEOs at Harvest Earnings. We talk about the business practices we love, but even better, the ones we love to hate. Come be a fly on the wall.
Hey, Terri.
Jeremy, how are you?
I'm good. So when last we met, well, not really, because we're constantly meeting, but when we last recorded, we chatted about culture and how everyone kind of agrees it's the most important thing possible. But from our point of view, we don't actually think there is such a thing as a corporate culture that everybody, particularly in large companies, shares and is doing, and nor should there be. There's all sorts of microcultures. Sometimes that's really smart because there's different situations, sometimes totally unintentional and could be very bad. But we do agree for sure that there are some behaviors that every company or virtually every company would want people to demonstrate in their daily work. And this is, we think, necessary, though not sufficient, to have the robust set of good behaviors that really drive a company to greatness. So we thought today we would talk about some of those behaviors that we think are minimally required and not that easy to achieve, though they're really easy to talk about. So
yeah, for sure. Well, of course, integrity. I mean, it's hard to argue with that. I mean, maybe a drug cartel thinks that integrity isn't important for them. I don't know. You would disagree.
But loyalty might be right up there.
Yeah. So integrity, how do you get it in your corporation is, of course, really, really hard. But in big corporations, I mean, we're talking mostly about companies with, thousands of people. If you're a two-person firm, quite a lot easier. But one of the things we all the time that we think it does not show a lot of integrity or honesty is ghosting, which appears to be severely on the rise in a lot of ways. I mean, vendors, of course, for sure, but I think even internally, somebody sends an email, they just don't get a response. Interview candidates, I mean, one of my daughter's good friends, was interviewing. Well, many of them are interviewing actually regularly, but one I heard about was 3 rounds of interviews. And, you'll hear back next week. And then radio silence. And you know how much pain and agony somebody goes through for 3 rounds of interviews. There's the prep and the anxiety alone. And then you just don't ever hear back, even though you reach out, is there any further information I can provide? And you just get nothing. And it's just awful.
The unwillingness to give what is considered bad news is astonishing. And what's weird about it is people prefer getting bad news to no news.
Oh, absolutely. Because you're
not doing them any favors.
No, I mean, eventually, of course, at some point you go, well, I guess I didn't get the job. But it lacks integrity for sure. But so how do you try and get integrity in your culture? I mean, obviously, all of these things start with behavior at the top, and all of your managers and your policies. So your policies have to encourage integrity, and in this case, it's pretty easy. If we interview someone, we tell them the answer. We don't leave them hanging. Period. And there has to be processes that allow that to happen. And we're not, of course, saying they have to respond to every cold solicitation they get. But once you interview somebody, come on.
If you've invited them into your house, it is not appropriate. It is required.
Yeah. So integrity is, the number one corporate behavior that we would like to see. Another one, I guess, is when we've talked about obligation to dissent. I think we talked about that in our I Want Everyone on Board podcast.
Yep.
I believe I told a story about Weiss, one of my former banking clients. but I have another obligation to dissent story that's related to another attribute that we think is very important, and that is inclusiveness. So back many years ago now, we were naming a project at a bank that has long since been gobbled up, but the bank was based in the South, mostly in like Tennessee and states surrounding, but they also had a presence in Florida. So we're naming the project, and there's a long time spent on this. What should we call this project? And one of the words in the name that had been settled on was focus. And the head of the Florida market was Cuban, I believe, sat very quietly listening to all this. And the CEO, to his credit, realized Adolfo he hasn't weighed in. He's not saying anything. So, Adolfo, what do you think about this name? And he sits back and he says, I don't like it. Like, what? But we spent all this time coming up with it and agreeing to it. And why? Why don't you like it? Well, think about it. If you say it with a Hispanic accent in particular, it can take on a whole different meaning that's not very nice. And then, of course, as you often point out, many times names of projects get used and turned around to something negative anyway. So we all were like, yeah, that's actually a really bad word to use. But none of us, of course, were thinking about it from if you say it with an accent standpoint. So having room.
Well, and indeed, in previous projects, it had been used as a name when nobody in the room brought this different perspective to bear. Yeah. And it did get turned around in an unpleasant way.
Yeah. So certainly having people who represent your constituents, your shareholders, your customers, your employees represented at the table is important and makes a huge difference. You want to talk about it?
Yeah. So one is something that we call see something, say something. And it's this idea that if you think of like we work for, we've done this a couple of times, but one particular retailer. So tens of thousands of employees, 1,000 stores across the country. They essentially have eyes and ears everywhere. And a lot of those eyes and ears do not feel connected to a mouth that is allowed to speak. And so haven't heard that one before, have you?
It's allowed to speak. Not a brain, it's the mouth. Just
the mouth.
Gotcha. Okay.
And we want to encourage people. I realize there's a very terrible, thing that led to that expression, see something, say something. But where there's thousands of eyes and ears seeing things, but not saying something. So one example was in this particular retail store, they had 1,000 different stores some were in malls, some were independent, some were small, some were big. So they all had different size, a different number of windows facing out. But they were all sent the same package from their vendor of posters that were used when there was a sale or some new product or something that they wanted to advertise in the window, which meant hundreds of these stores, the vast majority actually, received what was a set of posters that was good for the largest number of windows in any of their stores. And they would take out the 3 that they needed or the 6 that they needed, and they would just toss the rest.
So bad for the earth.
Bad for the earth, costs money, it's an extra step, and completely unnecessary because the vendor was completely capable of being told how many to send to which store. But until we did our project and kind of solicited these things, people did not say anything. So management was actually surprised to hear that this was going on. Now, on the flip side, so you want a culture, or we don't, as you know, like that word, but we want a behavior that is see something.
Wait. It's not that we don't like the word culture.
No,
we should make this point. We kind of in jest wrote, there's no such thing as a corporate culture. But of course, what we meant is there's no overarching culture that works and that is true for an entire company if it's of any size. I mean, there are
Right.
some that come close. Google maybe comes close, Disney comes close, but they don't actually have a single corporate culture of
Right.
X behaviors
Right.
that work across the entire company.
So you do want to engender this behavior of see something, say something. The flip side of that is you want the behavior of hear something, do something.
That's mine, by the way.
Yes, yes, it was. Would you like to talk about it?
No, you can talk about it.
Let's see if I get it right.
Okay, I think you will.
So let's say that at some point in the past, somebody had in fact brought this issue of the posters, wasted posters, brought to someone's attention. Clearly, it wasn't acted upon. And we find that is often the case that, in fact, employees, like go into almost any store, you and I do this all the time, and we'll talk to the salesperson and say, do they ever ask for your opinion? No, they never do. So there isn't real respect being shown, even though the poster behind them saying what the corporate values are always includes, respect. But even when they're asked, or even when they say something not having been asked, they feel like they're talking into the wind. Nobody's listening. So how do you get supervisors and managers, when they hear something, to figure out how, with practicality, with efficiency, without grinding to a halt, that they assess if there's something there, and if so, they do something. So that's hear something, do something.
Yeah, here's something, do something. So as you know, someone near and dear to my heart is a Googler. And one of their sort of corporate values is a bias to action. And I think I love that 3 words. I mean, it is basically here's something, do something, right? It's a bias to action. And a lot of companies do not have that. I don't know if I've told this story on a podcast before, but going back when I was a banker, my wonderful boss, Mike Clausen, who I know I have mentioned, epitomized hear something, do something, although what he did was empower me to do something. I went and I complained that couldn't get, there was lots of operational errors going on. And I was at my wit's end as the one, who's the customers were coming and complaining to. I was a corporate banker. He didn't just listen to my concerns, because oftentimes what you hear is, listening is what we need. Well, no, listening is not enough. You gotta listen and then do something. So he said, okay, I hear you. Now I am going to give you the authority to create a committee to work jointly with operations to fix these issues. And we did. And it was great, because I met a whole bunch of new people, some of which are still friends today, and we got things fixed. And of course, it turned out there was one particular problem. We couldn't get accounts closed. That was just a switch in some system that had been toggled. I mean, not physically, and it was don't close on zero balance, I think. So it would go to zero. We'd try and close it. Nope, it would pop back open. Anyway, here's something, do something.
What a clever strategy to make sure you never lose customers. You just make it impossible to close.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the word empowerment, which is a word that gets so overused, but the concept behind it, of course, is really important, but it requires a lot of engineered processes to make it work. And it is another behavior that we think is really important. Not by somebody just touting it, but for example, a call center operator in that same bank, if somebody called in, was upset and they should have had a fee waived, probably had to jump through all kinds of hoops to get that fee waived. It had to be brought to someone. And we know from our own experience that it turns out that in a lot of those cases, if you just give the call center rep the authority in various situations to, for example, waive fees, the calls are shorter, the customer is happier, and there is no material risk to the company. And so you are truly empowered, and the call center rep feels good because there was a problem. They helped somebody solve the problem.
Yeah. No, it's That is very true. So sort of the freedom to do your job without being micromanaged, I guess,
Right.
is what that's about. And that example is undoubtedly cost effective as well.
Very.
If somebody in a risk department said, "Oh, we can't give all of these, these folks that much ability to, affect the bottom line." But in fact, complaints get escalated and more time is taken, etc. So, yeah, it's tough. It's tough to get these across a company, though. And I mean, we've talked about a handful. I don't know. Do you want to talk about curiosity?
Well, maybe we should leave it for next time.
Okay. Yeah, that's probably true. So I think let's see if we
And
can.
I hope people will be curious enough to listen.
Yeah. So the sort of the overarching things we think are important for corporate behaviors are obviously integrity, an obligation to dissent. So you don't want a company full of yes men and women. See something, say something, which absolutely is epitomized by what we do. Just a little plug for our company, Harvest Earnings. We I don't want to say force people to say something, but we give them a huge platform and a bully pulpit, as you like to say. But I don't like that expression, even though I know it's not about being a
A
bully.
megaphone.
A megaphone. Okay.
All the way up to the CEO's office.
Yeah, exactly. Here's something, do something, which also, of course, is the bread and butter of what we do, because seeing something and saying something is only the first part, isn't it? And then inclusivity and the freedom to get your job done. Now, of course, these are all super easy to say, really hard to make part of your culture, but you've got to reward people for doing these behaviors and cut loose the people who don't. I mean, not first offense. I don't mean that. Although some first offenses, but especially if they're in. Well, anyway, some first offenses are worthy of showing the door. Oh, I guess I should. I've just got to tell my Ted Lasso story.
Of course.
So this is about. Well, I guess it's about teamwork, really, which we didn't even put in here. But working with each other. And of course, Jamie Tart is the superstar and is a hog on the field before he is reformed. Spoiler alert. And they're in a tough game. He is the top scorer. He's scored a goal, and Ted pulls him out of the game. Everybody is super shocked because you're pulling his, your best player off the field. But he was ruining the team spirit, the teamwork. Nobody else could do their job. He wasn't passing. And of course, it pays off. But we often discuss this. When do you cut somebody who is not fitting the corporate culture loose? And it's tough if they're your top performer. But in the end, we believe it is worth it to keep the behavior and the culture the way you want it. Because culture eats strategy for breakfast or something like that.
Or so Peter Drucker did not say.
Exactly. All right. More fun later.
Back to work. Bye-bye.
Bye.